when you hire the wrong people over here, this is probably the single biggest issue that we see um, when European companies fail. I mean, from sending the wrong people over here only because your top sales guy in Austria has a great track record. Everything he might be the best guy over there, but he probably doesn't know how to make it big on the marketing sales aspects here in the US. It is a different approach, a different world.
Europe builds it. America scales it. Welcome to Transatlantic Titans, the show where bold and visionary Europeans show how they are making it big in America. From challenges to lessons learned and massive opportunities, we bring you the people and ideas shaping the future of transatlantic business. And now, here is your host, the lawyer for Europeans making it big in America, Manny Schoenhuber.
Welcome to Transatlantic Titans, the show about Europeans making it big in America. I am your host, Manny Schoenhuber, and today we have a very special guest who plays a crucial role in helping European companies make it big in America and really navigate the tax complexities of doing business in the US. Arnold Servo. Arnold, welcome to the show. Thanks a lot for being here.
Very smart, and thanks for having me. Not so sure about special, but happy to be here nevertheless.
Very special case. So before we dive right into the business side of things, maybe we'll start with you because you've been in the US for quite some time. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you're doing, how long you've been in the US, the whole 9 yards.
Whole 9 yards, probably now 2 years since I came to the US. So I'm not fresh off the boat anymore. Stories, many other Germans or Europeans who came over here, it was more of an accident actually. So I'm originally from Germany. I'm from Augsburg, not too far away from where you're from, also Bavaria. I spent my entire life there until the US, went to school there, went to university there, went with a scholarship program to Ohio, and it was 1,000% sure that I will come back to Germany after 1 year. I mean, I already had a job with back then it was Siemens or Fujitsu Siemens, and I was helping there. And that master's program, was an MBA program, was for me just a little bit of an adventure, something to get on to my career. I've never imagined living in America. So I went through this program, and I have to say I got addicted to the US lifestyle pretty much immediately. So after that, I was wondering to truly study. I thought, okay, maybe what's about a year of practical experience. I got actually a job offer in Ohio. And then a big accident. I got a job offer from a firm in Atlanta. And it happened to be a German firm. It's not Rödl. Now it's Rödl. Was about a matchmaking helping, if you will. It was only the German connection I wanted to do flavor in my life. What Rödl offered was basically consulting, advising, helping a myriad of German companies. Again, there was only German companies in the US. I got the opportunity to get the best of both. Living in the United States, helping US businesses, but all of them with a European connection. So that's how it started. And then fast forward more than 10 years later, where what kind of folks here? I have an American wife, American kids, and American life. So it was one of blind like this, how it's so often with other people, it just happened that way.
I think you said it the right way. The best of both worlds, not only for you, but also for your family, right?
Sure. We spent, the family, and we have 2 young kids. We spent a lot of time in Europe. We enjoyed it. We helped at opportunity. We have a little second residence over there, so it makes things easier. But yes, for me, it's still of thoughts.
And you already mentioned Rödl, but if we stick to yourself, what's your role? What's your position currently? How did you start out maybe at Rödl, and what's your position now?
I started out as a complete nobody, knowing nothing, coming fresh from school, only know what a debit or credit is in a CPA firm. CPA, classic tax advisory, audit, business consultants, and I really knew nothing. Obviously, I came out of a master's program, I knew everything, but that was huge. That could maybe make dream that it's not the case. So I started as a staff accountant, or staff one, how it's called now. Well, I guess I'll work my way through the different ranks, become a senior and a manager, and then very early in my career, and I found what started by the way, I think I mentioned it, in Atlanta, in Georgia. Fairly early the opportunity to open an office for our firm in Alabama, in Birmingham, which I knew nothing about. I didn't know anything about Alabama. I didn't know anything about opening an office. So we did it anyway, which I think we may talk later about. It is also a bit the American way of sometimes doing things. And so I opened an office in Alabama. They grow very quickly, very fast. And then another opportunity popped up to open a new office in Houston, where I am right now. So after 2 years in Alabama, we opened the office here in Houston. And then also 11 years ago. So now I'm a managing partner. I'm a managing partner of the Birmingham, Alabama, the Houston, Texas. And since we opened last year, almost 4.5 years ago, the Delaware, Colorado office. So I'm in charge of those 3 offices in this region. I'm still a generalist. So generalist means in our firm I'm responsible for audit work, insurance work, tax advisory, tax compliance, business consulting. Some of my colleagues will say, if you're not good at anything, you just try everything. For us, that's my story.
Welcome to the club on the legal side, I would say. We're not the specialist, but we can get by the generalist. But I think what's particularly interesting about your story is really you started out in Ohio, then Georgia, then Alabama, then Texas, now Colorado involvement there. How has that shaped your understanding, but also maybe your appreciation about the US? Because we'll segue into business discussions later, but it's very similar to when there's a company thinking about expansion to the US. It's not to a country, it's usually to a state or region.
You can say for most Europeans that come to the US, and you travel, you visit New York City, in California, you're in Florida, for sure. But the places where I started out or spent a significant amount of time are not the typical tourist spots. I mean, Atlanta, Georgia, Houston, Texas, certainly not Ohio, is where you typically go for vacation. But I also learned very quickly that is this one country, sure, or it couldn't be more different. I will say that given the short distance between Atlanta, Georgia, and Birmingham, Alabama, that you can easily drive in 2.5 hours. Those are 2 different roads. From a cultural aspect, demographics, how everything looks, how everything feels, you can say this in a way also about Europe, but then you are already crossing state lines or country borders. Or you are half grew up in southern Germany, so you're very quickly either in Central Austria, France, Czech Republic, etc. This is every country. Here you are southern US. Now here in Texas, you drive 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, I'm still in Texas. But in one country, you have a myriad of different routes, of different environments, of different cultures.
Maybe that's also the difference as a whole, right? You're speaking one language, but you're traveling very far in distance-wise, right? So it's more than that approach. Obviously, you mentioned that growing up in Germany, speaking the German language, but for you personally, what's the appeal in advising German and generally European companies here in the US?
Very many listeners, you spend your childhood or your young adulthood in a country or in another place, and this is your home. And this shapes you for your entire life. Whether they're always not part of, you will always be there. And after now being here for over 20 years, I'm still an American. Still the American passport, and I'm a citizen of the American family, but I'm still a German guy here. And I will most likely never go away. It's neither will my accent. So from my heart or my emotional attachment is still to Germany, to Europe, and how things go over there, and how things are done, how things are lived, how we go about life. Now, sorry for mentioning this again, but this best of 2 world aspect comes into play very much when it comes to my advisory role. So that's why I like it. And both I can tell you probably dozens, hundreds of stories of people I do advise that come here and they don't have anything to do anymore with the old country. They go all into the US culture and almost bid farewell to where they came from.
There's really 2 pockets that we obviously see and get to advise, right? You have the classic expats that probably stay in the US for a year or 2, continue to live their European lifestyle and happily move back to Europe. And then there's guys like us where we initially thought we'll go back to Europe, but then we're stuck here. And we're still making the best of it, but we can also use it, the language, the cultural aspects to advise and hopefully guide on the business and the personal level.
I agree.
So maybe talk about the work you already discussed it a little bit, tax, audits, business consulting, advisory services. What do you guys do for German, other European companies in the US?
I mean, obviously, I don't know if use this now as an advertising platform for our firm, but a few things will make sense if I'll talk about our firm for a second. So, I mean, Rödl is for almost 50 years. We were originally from Germany and it became big by following in the beginning, mid-sized firms when they went abroad, when they went to Poland, to China, Czech Republic, to Brazil, to India. No wonder the Germans expanded their footprint, their operation. We saw 50 years ago a need for having advisors, and it's not a language thing, Money. It's not, okay, a lot of people in China can speak perfect German. It's not the same thing. So we have people over there, in our case, in the US, they understand German business law, German tax law, German auditing standards, in general, the business environment in the originating country, and then are hopefully also experts here. And I think that bridge that we provide for our clients is something that many other firms are doing. That started as a German selling point. We evolved, and I would say here, especially here in Houston, I mean, more than half of my practice is not German anymore. It's a lot of Turkish inbound businesses, Finnish, Dutch. In other offices, we have a very strong Italian influx. But that's not the same. You have experts that are originally from our home country, understand their business environment, laws, tax, insurance requirements, while also experts here in the US. That's what we do. We currently serve about 3,000 European companies in the United States. A lot of great stories, I guess stories where things didn't work out, everything in between. And one of it, if I have to pick one aspect, this is what makes it exciting. It's always something new, always a different story, attempt to conquest the US market. So for me, getting still after so many years, extremely exciting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, of course, because I think it's very similar on the legal side, where you have a European focus and a cultural and language understanding, yet boots on the ground here in the US. But you already mentioned the more suite of advisory. But if I am maybe a European, German or other company, where do you guys, or when do you guys really come into play as we're thinking about, okay, let's enter the US? What's the, generally speaking, first touch point that those companies thinking about entering the US have with you guys?
You know, Marty, there's not a general answer on this. If you choose, it won't be when they first start thinking about it. And sometimes we actually meet those firms on the initial planning phase. They say, okay, they have a need for expansion because maybe one of our big customers is requesting that we come, or we simply satisfied the home market, the European market, and we need to expand elsewhere. And this is one of the countries on their shortlist. We speak with them when they are in the initial planning phase, because this is when we have the best opportunity to structure it the right way. We get a lot of clients that have already been here for several years, 2 or 3 years, and also very often where things didn't work out. It might be in initial structuring, but very often it's also related to data infra strategy. I enjoy both. I enjoy helping on both sides, from a white canvas and really design it how we believe is the proper way to enter the US market, or sometimes it's a cleanup job. And either way, it's helping those companies to get better.
Is there a typical size of companies or industries that you're working with? Because just like there's the big four on you guys' side, tax and accounting work, there's obviously big law where everybody's trying to work with publicly traded companies, which is totally not what I'm doing. What's the business approach on you guys'?
That isn't any illusion list. So we do what the Germans do. Well, nowadays, what the Europeans do. And we serve clients that are quote unquote mailbox companies that have no substantive presence in the US. There's no employees, there's no assets. They literally have an address in the US and that's it. Or we serve clients that have 5, 6, 10 single locations, production sites in the US that make billions of dollars of US revenue, or everything in between. Obviously, it was very much driven by the typical businesses that the Europeans are strong in, or Germans are strong in. They're automotive, machine builders, anything in the normal construction side, anything on the renewable side, wind energy, solar energy, the typical strongholds of Western European countries or technologies. that are now being transferred to the US. Those are our focus industries. Innovation has brought a lot of funny aspects to our business as well. We are representing business that we never even thought of 10 years ago. Influencers, you name it. Industry that hadn't existed 10 years ago. But again, the answer is the same, the approach is the same. They need the exact same help from a different angle, but the same help on making theories. So there's no one specific sweet spot or right size from very small to very large. The elements truth now says we do not serve financial services, especially banks or insurance companies in the US. This is by choice. I think we get a very special skill set for this and that we want to possess, and then we should probably not touch it.
Obviously, it's a niche. It's probably a geographic niche that I always say, I'm a generalist, but I have a very niche practice as it relates to representing European clients here in the US. When you think about your competitors, is there something that you feel like this is actually an advantage for you guys to maybe not go after the same clients that everybody else is going after actively and really just saying, okay, we stick to the European roots or international route as compared to other accounting firms? Because in the legal field, we have the exact same setup.
Yes and no. So the type of work that you do requires a very special expertise. So if you are consult Italian or Dutch or German companies from a tax perspective on both sides of the fence, you need to possess that skill set. Having a skill set is crucial if you want to offer those services. That excludes, for the most part, the smaller firms. It's simply not economical for them to acquire that kind of skill set easily. We don't compete with the very large firms because some of the large firms have recognized that the international inbound companies are very attractive for everybody. And this is where you want the best jobs taking down on tools coming to us. Typically, those firms are already fairly, reasonably successful over there. And they have to find a different when to become more successful. Expansion in the US. There's no reason why you would want dare to jump over the Atlantic if there is still a lot more opportunities, much cheaper probably, come in Europe. So we are, for the most part, dealing already with very strong market competitors. And obviously, it's fun, not just for us, but also for our big firms to work with those kind of companies. And again, for everybody, if you develop an expertise, especially in those 4, 5, 6 countries, it is a very long way to replicate that kind of skill set or expertise and offer that to anybody. I mentioned 40, 50-year advantage on this, on what it helps us.
The one thing you do not do is legal advice, right?
That's
in the
right.
US. And is the US the only country where you guys don't do legal advice?
We are now present in, I think, 51 countries worldwide. There's many countries where we are not offering audit services because we started maybe as a law firm and we cannot, for that reason, offer audit services or vice versa. So no, the US is not the only country. Well, it's one of the few countries where tax and legal services are by law are separated.
Speaking from one European or Europe-born advisor to another advising European companies here in the US, I always try to explain it that we probably consider certain structural or legal issues, problems, overall strategies more so with a European lens or through the European lens than the typical quote unquote American advisor would do. Do you see that as something on the tech side as well?
100%, not only on the tech side. I mean, I think, yes, we are auditors and tax advisors, but we are also business advisors. And I could literally write a book on pitfalls or shortcomings or success stories on why this certain strategy works for some European companies and why some are failing. You actually did want to talk about this. No, 100%. I mean, I could cherry pick now a few aspects, especially on the market entry side, why some firms, when really look at it from a high standard perspective, will most likely fail.
Let's talk about those. Maybe we'll start with, based on your experience, how do you see that business generally differs between Europe and the US? If we're just generalizing two continents, completely different, but if you're hitting the high marks.
I mean, the core of our business doesn't differ that much. I mean, debits and credits are the same way in the US as they are in Europe. Well, the requirement to file income tax returns is very similar here and there. But the high points on how you approach from a marketing and sales perspective the US market is vastly different from how we typically do it in Europe. And advisors who only focus on the last part. For example, and this is probably not new to your audience, Western Europeans, especially the ones that are very engineering focused, they are in love with their engineering. They put their engineering or technical specifications, the superiority of their product, as the main selling point. Whereas, and this is not the general statement, when an American sells a product, a technical product, the value of it is typically what you go into war with. So if you buy my product, how much money can you save? How much more money can you make? It doesn't matter whether the thickness of the steel or the hardness of the steel is that much better or bigger or broader, or the data's throughput through this or that cables better, or the software. The first question you should answer to your customer is, how much more value do I generate? Not how much technically better my product is. After you have answered that question, I'm not sure you can delve into it or delve into the technical aspects, but this is one thing. I don't know how to do marketing here. We're so much more relationship driven. I mean, it's not the cliche that you sell on a golf course, and yes, you do sell on a golf course, but the relationship aspect of who you know from back in the day means so much more here than I believe over there in Europe. Of so many reasons. I think the biggest thing where I feel Europeans often struggle with is the US is a deceiving market. Deceiving from the sense that everybody speaks the language. I mean, if you grow in Western Europe, you learn English very early on. And typically, you speak English fairly well. You are exposed to pop culture, to Hollywood culture, to US movies, to US music. You vacation in the US probably several times, went to Florida and New York, and you think that you know this country. I will say you don't. If that's all your exposure was, the movies and the music and the few vacations, you still don't know the country. And the analogy or example I'll often provide is, if you know Western European, one American for that matter, it doesn't matter. You are expand to, let's say, China. The moment you start off the plane, you know exactly what you need help. I cannot read anything. The culture is so foreign, how everything works. You know immediately you will need help. And you got the false impression in the US that you already know everything.
Yeah, so it's really seems to be so easy, but I think both of us see it over and over again that it could be maybe a misconception. It also could be a do-it-yourself mentality. And you mentioned early on, this is probably something that you'll agree with. When we come in to clean things up, sometimes it starts simply with the incorporation bylaws, or probably for you guys on the transfer pricing or intercompany agreement, or even tax filings that got missed. That probably comes exactly from what you just spoke about, right? Because the US makes it so easy for Europeans to do business here, or appears to make it so easy.
No, I think that the US makes it easier. Unlike most European countries, if you want to start up a company, a business here, I think the US is still one of the most supporting or ideal breeding grounds for that. You have been used to potential clients or companies that are in the process of starting up, and you can literally open a company in the next couple of hours. There's not much that will hold you back from doing exactly this. That would be a very different answer or approach in Europe, especially in Germany. So yes, I think a lot of things can be made very easy here, but entering the US market or thinking you will win on the US market by doing it the exact same way how you do it in the Netherlands or in Denmark or in Germany is the perfect recipe for disaster.
So let's talk about those companies entering the US market or thinking about entering the US market. And the goal with this show is obviously to show the shiny, but also the real shitty. So what common mistakes do you see? Because I think when both of us are in those potential new client meetings, sometimes we can get a pretty good sense where the journey is going as they're starting their journey here in the US.
Also here, there's, again, I forgot a book on that topic alone, but
We should go off the one.
the US is not the market where you can, from a monetary standpoint, save yourself into the market, where it makes sense to go with a a very holding back approach into this market. I mean, it will require that you spend money in order to be seen, to be recognized, for everybody to understand you are actually here to stay. Saving yourself into this market is probably the wrong approach. But we can talk about the wrong tech strategy, the wrong setup, the wrong marketing strategy, money, all of this, so many more of those topics. All of this will ultimately come down to only one topic: the human capital. When you hire the wrong people over here, this is probably the single biggest issue that we see when European companies fail. From finding the wrong people over here, only because your top sales guy in Austria has a great track record, he won't be the best over there. He probably doesn't know how to make it big in the marketing sales aspects in the US. It is a different approach, a different world, a different experience level required. That is one aspect. About if you just send the wrong guys over here, hiring the wrong people. I mean, we went through countless cases together where we saw that you put your money on the wrong horse can be detrimental for your US business. So it is the partner that you bring in, because a story I hear over and over again, let's say you go to Las Vegas to one of the big trade shows, and there are a lot of people who have been in that segment of our industry for many years, and they will tell me, you know what, I know the market, you have a great product, let's join forces, and you do more of it. It sometimes works, but if it's the wrong guy, it's most likely doing a very messy thing to fix.
Yeah. One big question that always comes up, and that's always for us advisors, probably the elephant in the room. What do you tell, you already mentioned costs, everything seems to be a bit more expensive in the US than it is in Europe. And for you, it's probably even more relevant to have that discussions, given that your firm also has offices in Europe. I always get the initial pushback, oh, you're more expensive than our lawyer in Munich or Frankfurt. And then they say, okay, can't be that hard. We can just set up the corporation or the LLC by ourselves. What do you tell those clients, those prospects about generally the costs in the US and then particularly your advisory services?
I cannot make a general statement on costs. I mean, certain things are definitely more expensive in the US versus in certain European countries. Some other things are not. It goes both ways, and you want to compare energy costs. I will still argue that for the energy costs, whether it's not for gas or petrol or general electricity, is significantly cheaper here. So certain things are simply priced in a different market. Or not any company that comes in this market is not dictating a market. You have to accept the market prices, whether it's the price for real estate. You're also not comparing the land price when you go out in Alabama to the land price that you go out when you go to Munich, right? Different markets have different prices. Now when it comes to you or my business, also professional services have different prices. This is not because we as individuals make so much more money. It's a different environment. I think can say for all of us, of all our industries, the insurance costs or the litigation costs that are part of our environment are exponentially higher, more costly than over there in Europe. There's very rarely an apples to apples comparison. For instance, in my industry, when a company comes to say, okay, let's say a 50 million euro company in Munich, and my auditor charges me X for performing an audit. My US company, my US subsidiary is half the size, or you charge me the same amount of money as my German advisor does for assuring the parent company. Why is that? Because the laws and regulations that are surrounding our audit requirements are what we have to prepare for tax filings is simply different. In most cases, it's more excessive. If there is more work to perform a certain service, well, obviously it's more time. More time typically costs more money. It's simply impossible to have for every aspect on the US market or the expectation that will cost that much in Denmark, so it should cost that much here. It's simply not the case. You will come into this market and you have to accept the market.
Yeah, obviously agree. And I would say it's not that one system is better than the other or worse than the other. It's just different. And we had to, I think both of you and I accepted the differences as we stayed in this country. And we don't say, oh, things are better in one area versus the other. But if we're thinking about the landscape and based on your experience overall, having advised so many companies over quite a few years already, how has that landscape changed from your perspective if you're thinking about European companies doing business here in the US? Because sometimes we see more companies entering the market, then for various reasons, this company slows down, then it picks up again. And I think we're still plenty busy, but how do you think the business approach and maybe the business environment has changed for European companies in the US over the years? For better or for worse, doesn't matter. It's just different.
I think the business approach has not changed. The way how you entered the US market 20 years ago is no different than how you should successfully enter it now. If you have, when you respect the things that you discussed over, I guess, the last half an hour, I think that has not changed. But the business environment has changed. And if you look at maybe 10 years ago, when a lot of Western European companies, when the economy in Europe was very strong and there was a lot of capital surplus, very healthy balance sheets and profits over there, and yes, there was money available to enter the US market and maybe buy a US competitor or buy a US business or have a greenfield investment and build a factory here. When Europe was strong and when their profits over there are very healthy, there was a lot of influx of transfer of capital over here. That has changed. I mean, a lot of European countries are struggling right now with bureaucracy, with energy costs. Right now, for me, the biggest obstacle for not just Europe, for any company who wants to enter the US market is also for US companies, is the uncertainty. What kind of tariffs am I exposed to? It seems like it's changing almost every day right now. What kind of global crisis? Things became so fast changing. I always say that uncertainty is going to kill businesses. When I talk to a lot of my clients, tariffs itself are not a problem. Knowing what the tariffs are going to be. If you have a number and can ban it, then you can adjust your prices and you can have the discussions with your customers. You can build up into your supply chain. That's fine. But flying is never going to be fine.
So maybe that actually leads to a follow-up question about European companies thinking about entering the US market. Are there certain steps you think they should take to prepare themselves for that? But of course, we also know in Europe, we sometimes tend to over-engineer business plans and market expansions, and you create somewhat of an analysis paralysis and you're not doing anything, but maybe some small recommendations prior to entering the US market.
This sounds like a selling opportunity for you and me, but make sure you find the right advisors, whether from a legal side, or on the insurance side, or on the treasury banking side, also on the tax accounting side. Have the right advisors that will guide you through this process. I don't often see that a company takes the typical US approach that or kind of mentality. It's not very typical for Europeans. Talk to the right people. Do your homework. Again, don't overthink it, but do your homework. So it's as far as the starting point. There are wonderful resources for European companies that are thinking about entering the US markets out there. There are tons of very relevant seminars that are specifically geared to those topics. Take advantage of those. They are fairly inexpensive all over the place. This is something I would recommend to anybody who wants to really educate themselves on the top 10 points to set up everything more correctly here.
Let's talk about tax and accounting maybe for a second here. Keep it short and concise. Little teaser here. But if you're thinking about common tax and accounting pitfalls, because European companies just keep the European glasses on and look through those to the US, anything that comes straight to mind that you guys see over and over again?
Yes, there's one. The United States is also on paper different in one country, right? But the comparison works when you look at, for instance, how Switzerland and their cantons compared to the states here. The states in Germany versus the actual states in the US. It is mine. It's not share at all in comparison. And what understanding that again, one step back. A lot of European companies that start out here, they say, oh, I went somewhere and I should incorporate in Delaware or in New York, and that's where I pay taxes. So this is not true at all. Now also when you pay taxes when you are active, but you have entries in your assets or operational activity. That's not dictate or build the file or pay taxes. So that can make things very tricky, very complex. And it is exponentially more complex than the sales tax, the VAT. The pitfall I see very often is that the union saying, oh, we have like overstaying amount, that the tax involvement in, let's say, the airlines on Denmark. So it must be very similar here. Yes, in a certain way it is similar, not when it comes to the States. And especially not when it comes to sales tax. So global pitfalls, where I will flat out tell you, make sure you have the right advisor that will take you by your hand and guide you through this. But there's not, for somebody who lives in this environment, that's second nature. You gotta have the right advisor.
So you're saying Delaware is not the tax haven that everybody is using that state for incorporation for?
There's nothing to do with being tax haven. There are certainly, for certain companies, advantages to incorporate based on Delaware law. But from a tax perspective, I would never stand here and say the best state for tax purposes is XYZ. That's simply not how it works here.
But maybe on the positive side then, and I think what's also a little bit underrepresented or misunderstood in Europe is the tax incentives or deduction structures that companies can receive as they're looking for greenfield investments or if they're looking to expand to the US. Can you shed some light on those? Because those are probably more on the state and local levels.
Yes, there are statutory incentives that everybody can access on the federal level or the state level, focusing on employment tax rate. If you hire out some of employees, you will get so much money as a tax credit. I mean, this is available for everybody. I mean, what we see much more across the United States versus Europe, especially Western Europe, is those negotiated incentives. That's some of I would say larger investor comes to the US and says, well, on a whole factory, I want to invest $10, $20, $50 million in equipment, land, and building, on 100 employees. There are a lot of local communities, counties that will very much want you to come to their home or make their county your home. So they will enter into negotiations with you, and you can negotiate to have tax abatements on the property tax side or on the sales and use tax side. Some of them will give you free loans to build your facilities, or some of them will grant the land and the building to you if you commit in a certain way to be in their county. So those kind of incentives are significantly more prevalent and oftentimes more aggressive here versus in Europe. Nonetheless, if you come here with a fairly small footprint, maybe as a small service firm with a few employees, so that doesn't make much sense to have those negotiations with the counties. Size matters here, and what kind of investment matters here. I was saying this is not something you can quickly run over in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. Those things take time.
Well, you already mentioned sales tax. Isn't that the same as VAT in Europe?
No, it's not. The same point, however, I simplified in the easiest way. You sell something and there is a tax on what you sell that you will maybe charge to your customer. That's the underlying concept. There is no reverse charge method here in the US. There is no method where you charge sales tax to your customer and the customer can claim back. It doesn't work like this. Sales tax in the US becomes part of your acquisition costs. It becomes part of the cost of your product. There's a way to avoid that. There's a way to exempt yourself from paying this tax by earning money. We need to sell ours here in the US and often in Europe, only on sales tax that go for funding. I mentioned before, you also mentioned this as a pitfall. It is a pitfall. It has a certain level of complexity and certainly the amount of work that is involved to get this taken care of is simply different from most people's understanding how it works over there.
Yeah. And maybe another myth to a certain extent, but from an employee standpoint, definitely a benefit that there are certain states like Texas, like Florida, where you don't have state income tax. Can you educate a little bit about maybe the different state levels and tax levels, or not necessarily the bracket,
I have this discussion very, very often with potential clients or companies that are on the verge of coming over here. I will say that there is no tax haven in the US. You're absolutely right. There are states that they don't have an income tax on a corporate level. They have a different type of tax that is not necessarily derived from your net income. Only because a state doesn't have an income tax doesn't mean that they don't pay taxes. And the same is true on the individual level. You're right. There are states that the biggest ones are Florida or where we live in Texas. There's no income tax, personal income tax on the money that we earn. Yes, all of us, we pay taxes on the federal level. Doesn't matter that you live in the US, you always pay taxes on the federal level. But for instance, here in Texas, there is no income tax on the state level. And so, you don't wrongfully say, well, always not everybody again living in Florida or Texas. There are most people, there's so many other ways for a state to get your money. Really, not saying this is in general the case, but mainly the property tax, the tax that you pay on for owning a house or an apartment is significantly higher here. Maybe the sales tax that you pay here is higher here. Ultimately, the state will get their money. Whether it's the income tax, property tax, or sales tax, you have to look at the whole thing on a full 360 viewpoint and not just cherry pick one element of the tax bill.
Yeah, and I think maybe to round out that subject as well is when we work with European companies entering the market, and they always ask, what's better? Should I have a corporation? Should I have an LLC? Should I have an LP? We take the approach to say, well, we need to see your entire structure, right? What kind of entities do you have abroad in Europe, and where do you want to fit the US structure? And so that one size fits all approach is maybe on the legal side, if you're looking for limited liability and the protection it affords, correct. But what are your thoughts on the tax side? Because it's always at the end of the day, when we do it, a tax-driven decision whether we select one over the other entity structure.
I think that the lawyers and the CPAs, they don't agree, or when we just look at both of our firms, we don't basically never advise on not incorporating a structure where you have unlimited liability, where shareholders have unlimited liability to their share ownership. I mean, we as Rödl, and when I will speak out probably also for you, we will always advise on an entity form that has where the liability is carried at the investment, at the equity. So whether it's an LP, a limited partnership, an LLC, or a corporation, this is typically what we advise. And then, yes, you're absolutely right. It is not driven by the legal or liability aspect. It's driven by the overall global tax strategy. So the first question I ask is, do we qualify for a double tax treaty? There are some countries that don't have a double tax treaty with the United States, or most of the countries that you and I advise, whether it's Italy or Denmark, the Netherlands, Turkey, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, they all have very old, long-standing double tax treaties that can be used to your advantage. Some treaties have, I won't say loopholes, but some treaties have opportunities that others don't. For example, the US treaty has a very advantageous structure when you have your worldwide structure set up as a transparent flow-through model. Now I get into the details now, but others don't. If let's say you are a Dutch investor or a Turkish investor, the answer is 99.1% that the US subsidiary should most likely be a corporation. With other countries, you might want actually discussion about that. Yes, you're right. We look at who owns this whole thing ultimately. Who's the last person with a natural heartbeat that owns this structure? And where is he or she physically located? When am I married? They're going to pay taxes. And then this is the starting point. But you're absolutely right. There's no one size fits all approach on both questions.
Yeah, and that's probably why it's so important to keep a global point of view on those decisions. But when you're thinking back, and I always like to ask the question because I think same to you, the beauty about my job is seeing many different companies entering the US market, and after 2, 3, 5, 10 years, some make it, others don't. But is there like a success story, without naming any names, of course, that you really think about where you probably started with them as they entered the market and now they're this huge success story in the US? Anything that comes to mind and that you really look for you?
There's lots of them. if I need to pick out one, well, fairly recent one here in Texas, it's a Turkish company, and they entered the solar panel manufacturing market here. To be fair, it's a highly competitive market, especially when you compete with Chinese or Asian suppliers. The US market was already very saturated with very large, long-standing players here. And they entered the market from scratch, a greenfield approach. And they mentioned it's a Turkish company. They sent over a bunch of Turkish managers, all proven veterans, so they didn't buy into US expertise. I will say they started out with a lot of things where I was very skeptical, or this can work out. And also, to be fair, there was a struggle. It was not from an overnight to learned absolutely everything about this. Had the perseverance and also the money that goes to a stretch of funnel, of believing in yourself, keep punching, and now they're standing here as the major player in their sector, in this industry. There's oftentimes, and being very skeptical, very belief of all this is not looking very promising. We do our best to help them succeed, but in the end, they're also realistic. I did one of those stories where I thought, wow, this is unbelievable success, size-wise, profit-wise, standing-wise. So yes, and on one day, it's actually interesting. I recently talked to another advisor, also somebody who is on helping European companies. He's actually from Brazil, focused on European companies setting up in the US. And he was very adamant about that more than half of their clients that he advises to come over here, they will fail within the first 5 years. And I told him, I'm not mentioning names now, I told him this is not at all our story or our PC. I don't have freestyle stocks now. And I can confidently say that 95% of those clients that come over our desks, that we advise, and not because of us. Simply, they're the European companies that work with us here. They're successful. If they are successful, the percentage of European firms that we see at least is very, very little.
Then the logical follow-up question for that, of course, is what do you think holds certain European companies still back from entering US market? If you also see that most of the companies that actually dive in and take the right approach, that they do become successful in the US.
I will say there's nothing to answer your question. I understand that. Nothing should hold them back because I would still hold the American dream, by the way. And I still believe that if you come here the right way, with having a very good product, focusing tediously on excellent customer service, working hard every day, even a shared business partner to your customers, to your suppliers, I think you have a very small struggle actually not being successful. I still believe that. Or it's started done.
That's a perfect point to get to the next segment of the show, which is the core four.
Up next, the core four.
You already mentioned my book, hopefully a familiar concept because you're one of them, the CPA, in addition to the lawyer, banker, and insurance broker. But it's also the same 4 questions that I ask every guest on every episode. So are you ready for the core 4?
Next up, the core 4.
Let's go.
All right. First, challenges. You already talked a little bit about them, but really 1 or 2 biggest challenges that European businesses face in the US market from what you can see.
Just the human factor. They didn't say, I mentioned it before, the wrong people here. Selling the wrong guys over here or hiring the wrong guys here. You have to spend extra time, extra money to find the wrong guys, period. That's the single most important factor for me.
Challenges, hopefully you'll get to the lessons learned, which is the second of the core 4. If you could give European companies one piece of advice as they're entering the US for the first time, what would that be?
Try to not necessarily forget or set aside that you know how things are done in Europe. You're sure that you know how things are done in Europe. And now you have to learn how things are done here. Well, unless you are Apple or Microsoft or one of those guys where you can dictate the market, most likely you will have to accept the market. So you have to learn how things are done here and learn quickly.
Quickly, the future is the third of the core 4. So based on what you see and what you have been seeing recently in the business environment for European companies in the US, what are you expecting for the, let's say, next 5 years or so as they're doing business in the US?
From our opportunities or challenges?
The business environment, generally, opportunities, bullish environment. We have a lot of discussions about AI and modern technologies, of course.
Would probably be the first thing that comes to mind right now. And then because this mastering AI for your particular industry is, if this is not on your number one and number two, I can't probably for your own success, then we probably have to have a different discussions. I don't want to talk about the low-hanging fruit with AI, but about the supply chain. A lot of European companies learn about a hard way that similar or lateral supply chain no longer works in a safe way. You have to rethink your supply chain if you want to be sure that. I thought that COVID taught us that, but people forgot pretty quickly. Now with all our crisis, now it's Venezuela or now Iran, I think it is crucial that you have your supply chain fully under control on health alternatives at your disposal. I think this is a very big challenge you have to face for the next 5 years. Nobody knows what the administration will come up with next, but you have to get ready for that, and you have to have your alternatives also ready.
The fourth and last of the core four is the success factors, and you already talked a little bit about it, but what do you think sets those successful 95% successful European companies here in the US apart from the quote unquote not so successful ones, or the ones that are not really reaching their full potential, right? Because defining success in the US financially can be something very different from defining success in Austria.
Well, I acknowledge that I'm already boring you now and your audience. Or again, it comes back to the people. We can think and talk about where you have the wrong technology or the wrong norm on the product or if it presented the American way or the European way, you can talk about this all day long. And for people, invest in the right people that's will be investing in your success.
Includes the core four, which brings us to the next segment, short and sweet, hopefully, the rapid fire.
And now, rapid fire, this or that.
This or that, which, yeah. Rapid fire, right? So six questions and you can pick one answer. Obviously, I always try to make it a little more personal to the guest. So you ready for the rapid fire?
Sure. Ready.
Audit or tax?
Audit.
Ice hockey or football, as in soccer? Oilers or Bruins?
Oilers.
Augsburg or Houston?
Augsburg.
Ski or après ski?
Well, we're in a ski and so ski.
The last and certainly most important of the rapid fire is Oktoberfest in Munich or Platter in Augsburg. That concludes the rapid fire, and I really get to the closing section. Anything that you think was a very educating impression, or maybe even first impression of doing business for you personally in America? Any culture shock experiences, anything that you remember that you cherish and that has maybe educated you about how you're doing business now?
Oh, my worst counters of those encounters and more experiences. I mean, if you want to take it on the lighter side, my whole first kindling was fresh off the boat. Somebody asked me, how are you? I mean, I would literally answer that question in a elaborate way and explaining how my day went and maybe how my week went or what I didn't go now. It took me going a couple of weeks to understand that they're asking me about that. So a simple, good, how are you? Would have been perfectly fine. One of many examples I can give you where it's just a little bit different here. What shaped me the most from the beginning that our built here is that can-do attitude. Why you not know ourselves in bureaucracy or in cumbersome processes. We say, hey, there's an opportunity to go after it. I'm probably not replicating this taking now the correct way, but Richard Branson believes that if somebody offers you an opportunity or you don't know how to do it, you accept and then we figure out how to do it. Not the right answer for everybody at any given time, but it's still, I think, reflects that can-do attitude that I still see in America everywhere.
I think you also said, screw it, let's do it. Richard Branson. Yeah. the, the short version. But then maybe also to that end, have you picked up any American habits since coming to the States? Of course, I know you're an early riser, go to the gym very early, but anything that you'd see people in Augsburg now questioning, what the hell are you doing? It's Arnold the American. I get that sometimes.
We can start my out answer. Honestly, I do not think of anything normal where I'm doing something so super American of a habit, and my friends would look at me and say, "What other one?"
Maybe you don't notice it.
No, you're right. To watch the answer, I cannot come with one thing right now. So,
Well, then maybe that question: if you had to describe American business culture in one or two words, what would they be? Maybe compared to Europe or just in general, you already said it's more the can-do approach and just do it approach, but is that really all? What are you thinking?
I mean, there's an extreme logic question. Explaining in short a culture is one of your guys. I actually use that kind of discussion when I advise people. Yes, it's America. But if you try to explain a New Yorker and say, well, all Americans are not New Yorkers, you already lost in details. Or if you compare New Yorker with somebody maybe in Mississippi, it is super going to work. There's not one culture in America. There's not one. An economy with all 300 million market participants, more than 300 million people here. The difference couldn't be greater. We are structured into 3 different time zones. I would struggle with explaining one American culture to somebody in Europe and saying, well, they're all the same like that. I couldn't.
The misconception, probably, that you mentioned earlier. Yeah. Of course, now somebody really enjoyed this conversation and they feel like, oh, I need better tax advice or I need more introductory advice before I enter the US market. How can the audience connect with you?
I'm only looking in the other contact information on our website, the review on Facebook, on Instagram.
We will link those in the show notes. So 2 final questions, and one is the catch-all. But the second to last question is, do you have a personal quote or motto that guides you in business and in life?
I have one quote that I live my entire life by, but one quote, it's out of the sportsman, it's out of the hockey world. One of our most famous players, Wayne Gretzky, retired a while ago, but he said, you miss 100% of the shots that you won't take. I believe that. And I think it's a universally true statement. Yeah.
Brings back the athlete as well, right? So last question, as with every lawyer, there's the catch-all at the end. Anything that you'd still like to share? Anything that we missed? Anything that you feel like people need to know before we hopefully do a follow-up in the future?
Anything that is usable. Something I touched on before. When you think about the United States, or if you think about coming to the United States, think about going to China. Accept the fact that you will most likely need help. Everything. Take that help out, accept that help. With the right advisors, with the right friends, with the right attitude, you will be successful. I've no doubt.
Great. Final words. Arnold, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us today. I, of course, wish you, your family, nothing but the best, and I'm looking forward to doing this again in the future. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's the show. Wait. Before you go, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss the next one. And if you have thoughts, questions, or topics you'd like me to cover, drop a comment. I read every single one. If you're serious about entering or scaling in the US market, head over to masteringmarketentry.com or mannyschoenhuber.com for more insights and resources. Thanks for listening. And until next time, go out there and make it big in America.